The city was pulsing with life, the streets filled with sounds and colors, but they also carried a palpable tension. Skyscrapers cast shadows over small businesses, where locals tried to make a living, defying the hardships of everyday life. Among them was a young black man, known for his warm smile and unwavering determination, who dreamed of improving life in his community. He spent his afternoons organizing events and discussing projects that could bring about change, but the weight of reality was always present. Across town, a white police officer walked with the confidence of someone who believed he was the guardian of order. The officer, respected by some but feared by many, had a biased view that shaped his interactions with the community. To him, the rules were clear: respect the law or face the consequences. His rigid, authoritarian manner often resulted in abrupt approaches, especially toward young people who, in his view, were more likely to cause trouble. It was on one of those warm afternoons that their paths crossed. The young man, excited about a new community project, was on his way to a meeting when the police officer, on a routine patrol, decided it was time to show who was in control. He spotted the young man standing on the corner and, without hesitation, walked over to him with typical authority. "Hey you, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at home studying instead of lounging around?" he snapped, his voice thick with contempt. The young man, surprised and hurt, tried to find the words to defend himself, but for a moment, the world seemed to stop and humiliation enveloped him like a dark cloud. The police officer did not wait for an answer. His authority imposed itself like a heavy cloak, suffocating any attempt by the young man to defend himself. The gazes of passers-by, which had previously been floating in relaxed conversation, now turned to the confrontation. The young man felt his face heat up as shame took over his body, as if everyone around him was listening to his failures, not just those of the police officer. "You don't know what it's like to work hard for something in life, do you?" the police officer continued, his tone sarcastic. "I think it would be best if you stayed out of trouble. This place is not for people like you." The cutting words, steeped in prejudice, reverberated in the young man's mind, while indignation began to replace humiliation. The police officer seemed unaware of the pain he was causing. Deep down, the young man fought the urge to respond. He wanted to shout that he was doing the best he could, that his struggle was worthy, and that he was not a bum. However, the fear of confrontation and the concern about the repercussions of the situation kept him silent. He felt trapped in a cycle of helplessness and injustice. Voices from the crowd began to rise, some expressing outrage, others laughing nervously, unable to intervene. A sense of loneliness enveloped the young man as the police officer continued to hurl insults, completely oblivious to the impact of his words. Finally, in a gesture of courage, the young man decided to walk away. He turned and began walking, his head down, tears threatening to run down his face. The humiliation was overwhelming, but amidst the pain, a spark of determination emerged. He would not let this moment define him. As he walked away, the police officer glanced at the passers-by, hoping they would agree with his stance. But looks of disapproval and disapproval began to spread among the people. A whisper of discontent began to form, leaving the police officer in a state of discomfort, a feeling that was new to him. The mood on the street had changed, and even if he didn't realize it, the battle between prejudice and empathy was beginning to unfold around him. The humiliation the young man faced that day did not fade with time. Instead, it lodged itself in his heart, echoing the police officer's words in his mind. Every time he left his house, the fear of being stopped and the possibility of being judged followed him. However, instead of allowing the event to define him, he committed to transforming his pain into motivation. The wound propelled him to fight for change, not only for himself, but for all those who felt deprived and disrespected. Days later, he began meeting with other young people from the community, forming a group to discuss how they could promote positive actions and impact their reality. They dreamed of holding events that celebrated local culture and educated residents about rights and equality. Together, they decided to organize a community festival that would promote inclusion and unity. Meanwhile, the police officer, still caught up in his routine, began to feel the consequences of his actions. The incident had gained notoriety on social media, and the city had become a battleground for divergent opinions. Many turned against the officer, calling his approach racist and inhumane. His superiors, sensing the pressure from the community, summoned him to discuss his conduct, and he was forced to reflect on his actions. The meetings, which had previously been routine for him, were now moments of reflection. The police officer, confused and angry, began to question his beliefs. He had always believed he was on the right side, but the growing dissatisfaction of the community forced him to face reality. The idea that he could be the cause of someone's pain tormented him, leading him to relive that moment and the young man's look, which reflected indignation and sadness. On the other hand, the young man began to become a respected voice in the community, encouraging others to join the movement. He felt like he was building something bigger, something that could change the narrative of his city. As he organized the festival, hope blossomed in his heart, and the pain of humiliation turned into strength. The night before the festival, a wave of anxiety washed over the young man. He looked in the mirror, remembering the police officer's approach and feeling stronger for having overcome that moment. "Tomorrow, I will make a difference," he whispered to himself, with renewed determination. The morning of the festival arrived bright and sunny. The colorful banners and the excited voices of children and adults echoed through the streets, creating an atmosphere of celebration and hope. The young man, now a respected community leader, was at the center of it all, welcoming participants with a genuine smile. Every handshake and hug reminded him of the purpose he had embraced. He was not just organizing an event, he was building a better future for his community. Meanwhile, the police officer assigned to security for the event felt a mix of emotions as he approached the scene. He knew he had a job to do, but the thought of confronting the young man made him nervous. Images of the humiliation still lingered in his mind, and he wondered if he could face the young man and, more importantly, if he would be able to apologize for his past actions. As the festival came to life, the townspeople gathered together, displaying a diversity and a spirit of unity that made the young man beam. He felt proud to have brought so many together to celebrate their roots and fight against prejudice. The stalls were filled with traditional foods, local crafts, and music that resonated with the soul of the community. The police officer watched from afar, struggling to find the right moment to approach the young man. He was aware that interactions could be awkward, but a part of him wanted to change. The feeling of being a spectator at an event that symbolized everything he didn't understand bothered him. So he decided he needed to make an effort. He took a deep breath and walked toward the young man. The young man, upon noticing the police officer's presence, felt a wave of conflicting emotions. He wanted to feel angry, but the positive atmosphere around him prevented him from doing so. As the police officer approached, a silence hung between them, charged with expectation and tension. "Hi," the police officer began hesitantly. I'm the officer who approached you a while back." The words came out of his mouth as a whisper, but the impact was like a thunderclap. The young man looked him in the eye, searching for the sincerity in his gaze. "Yes, I remember," he replied, his voice firm but with a slight tremor. "Why are you here?" The officer hesitated for a moment, the weight of his previous actions weighing heavily on him. I came here to apologize. What I did was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way." The sincerity in his voice was evident, but the intensity of the situation still had the young man on edge. "Do you think a simple apology will fix what happened?" the young man asked, his voice firmer than he had expected. The pain of humiliation still throbbed in his heart, and he wondered if he could ever forgive someone who had inflicted such shame on him. The officer felt the weight of his words. He never imagined his approach would have such a profound impact. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I'm trying to change. The way I thought and acted, I realize now that it was wrong, and that's why I'm here. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore," he said, sincerity echoing in every word. As emotions began to flow, the young man looked around, taking in the energy of the festival and the smiles of the attendees. He remembered why he was there. This celebration was more than an event. It was an affirmation of identity, a cry against prejudice and oppression. And while the police officer was a symbol of the system he was trying to challenge, the young man knew that change was possible, even if it was in small steps. If you really want to change, start listening. Learn from the people you're supposed to protect, not just the ones you see as criminals, the young man said, his voice softening a little. We're here to build something better. You can be a part of that if you really want to. The police officer nodded, understanding the depth of what the young man was saying. I do, and I promise I will do my best. I will strive to be an ally. Please let me help. The young man looked into the officer's eyes, searching for a sign of genuine intent. He saw vulnerability and a desire for change there. With a nod, he decided he could give it a try. Okay, let's work together then, but only if you're serious about it. The tension between them began to dissipate, and the festival, which had been a symbol of overcoming and unity, now also became an opportunity for personal transformation. The police officer felt a weight lifted from his shoulders as he realized that he had a chance to redeem himself. As the festival progressed, a new energy permeated the atmosphere. The young man and the police officer, now with a common goal, began to get involved in the activities, helping to organize games, introduce local artists, and interact with visitors. The connection between them, although still fragile, began to grow stronger with each smile exchanged and each challenge overcome. During a break in his activities, the young man turned to the officer. Have you noticed how happy people are? This is what we want. A space where everyone feels safe and welcome. The officer nodded, absorbing every word. He was beginning to understand that true safety didn't come from a uniform or a gun, but from building relationships of trust and respect. I had no idea the impact I could have, he confessed. I always thought I was doing the right thing, but now I realized there was a barrier between us. The young man smiled, seeing the police officer's willingness to learn. And there's still a lot to do. It's important to listen to people's stories. Each one brings a lesson, a different perspective. The police officer became thoughtful. He had always focused on solving cases, but he had never stopped to listen to the people who were experiencing those problems. Let's get started now, the young man suggested. I'll introduce you to some people who have incredible stories to share. Together, they headed to a tent where several locals were gathering to tell stories of life, resilience, and hope. The police officer was amazed to hear stories of resilience, of battles against prejudice and violence. The community's experiences were rich and profound, and each story touched his heart in ways he had never imagined. He realized that the lives he thought he knew were much more complex and vibrant than the image the newspapers usually portrayed. As the day went on, the festival became a true symbol of transformation. The police officer, previously closed in his convictions, now found himself surrounded by a new perspective. He was learning to see the community not as an object of control, but as a space for collaboration. The young man, in turn, felt the difference in the way the police officer behaved. With each interaction, he became less of an agent of repression and more of a friend, an ally. This transformation did not go unnoticed, and the community began to notice the change. As the festival unfolded, the atmosphere of hope and transformation began to spark a renewed spirit in the community. However, the path to change is not always easy. The euphoria of the event soon gave way to new challenges. As the young man and the police officer worked together, some members of the community remained skeptical of the officer's intentions. During one of the post-festival planning meetings, one of the older residents voiced his concerns. How can we trust you? What happened in the past can't be erased with a few good intentions, he said, his voice thick with frustration. The officer, who was now better prepared to deal with resistance, listened attentively. I understand your skepticism. I don't expect everyone to trust me right away. What I can do is show, through actions, that I am committed to change. I am here to listen and learn, he replied, maintaining a respectful and humble tone. The young man, sensing the tension, intervened. That's true. We need to give everyone space to express their concerns. Change takes time, and actions must be consistent. Let's work together to rebuild that trust. He knew this was a crucial opportunity to demonstrate that they were all on the same team. As the group discussed ways to create greater connections between police and the community, the young man decided it was time for a more focused event. He proposed a series of dialogue workshops where community members could meet with police officers to discuss experiences, concerns, and solutions. The police officers supported the idea and offered to facilitate some of the sessions. Enthusiasm for the initiative began to grow, but doubt still lingered in the air. The criticism and suspicious looks were not easy to ignore. The young man felt the pressure, but he was determined to see the project flourish. As the workshops began, the results were mixed. Some participants were open to dialogue, while others were reluctant to share their experiences. The police officer, on the other hand, was learning to adapt to these dynamics, understanding that vulnerability and empathy were essential to building authentic relationships. During one of the sessions, a young woman in the group who had faced discrimination raised her hand. "I just want you to know how I felt in those moments. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the feeling that my life didn't matter," she said, looking the officer directly in the eye. He felt a wave of sadness and empathy, acknowledging that her journey to change was far from complete. The dialogue session in which the young woman shared her experience had a profound impact. The police officer felt the pain in her words, every syllable resonating in his heart. He realized that the emotional scars left by experiences like hers would not be easily erased, and that acknowledging these wounds was the first step towards healing. Determined to not only listen, but also to act, he stood up. "Thank you for sharing your story. I can't imagine the pain you felt, but I want you to know that I'm here to learn and improve. If there's anything I can do to help you or your community, please let me know," he said, sincerely. The room was filled with a reflective silence. That simple statement seemed to have created a bridge, a space for trust to begin to build. The young woman looked at the police officer, searching for a sign of authenticity, and found in him a new determination. A connection was forming. As the weeks passed, the workshops continued, and the officer became a more effective facilitator. He was learning to listen not just to the words, but to the emotions behind them. The community was slowly beginning to see that he was committed to changing not only his actions, but also his mindset. The young man felt increasingly hopeful. The open discussions were surfacing not only concerns, but also ideas for how the community and police could work together. Proposals began to emerge for future events, such as health fairs, mentoring programs, and cultural activities that would strengthen unity. One day during one of the workshops, a community member suggested that they hold a joint event where the police could participate in a recreational activity with the youth, promoting positive interactions. The officer was excited about the idea and offered to help organize it. It was an opportunity to show that he was willing to integrate into the community in a more meaningful way. However, not everything was perfect. Some members of the community were still critical and suspicious. This could all just be a facade. "What will happen when the festival is over?" asked one participant. The young man could sense the tension in the air and knew he had to deal with it. He turned to the officer and together they tried to address the concern. "We're here to stay. We're not doing this just for one event. This is a long-term commitment," the young man declared, looking into the eyes of those present. "If we can keep this dialogue open, we can build something lasting." The words echoed, and the room began to fill with hope. The police officer smiled, realizing that despite the doubts, there was a genuine desire to create a better future.